Good evening, everybody. My name is Lori Friedley, and I am here from the Mamaroneck Public Library, except for not in the library. This evening, Paul is here from Larchmont. Paul, please wave or say something.
Hi, how you doing? Thanks for coming, everyone.
He's my co-host, and we also have the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation from Karen Dukess, who is, and I will read a little bit about her from her real biography, and then tell you something even more, which is a true library story. Her biography reads, Karen Dukess has a work history as eclectic as her taste in books. She has been a tour guide in the former Soviet Union, a newspaper reporter in Florida, a magazine publisher in Russia, and for nearly a decade, a speechwriter on gender equality for the United States, a United Nations Development Program. She has blogged on raising boys for the Huffington Post and has written book reviews for USA Today. She has a degree in Russian studies from Brown University and a master's in journalism from Columbia University. And she lives in Westchester. And then there's a little bit more, but the big piece of it and the fun piece of it is she is an author who writes books in the Mamaroneck and the Larchmont libraries. Yay! And the reason why I first came across Karen is social media at its best. Her book, The Last Book Party, I read as a galley, and I loved it. And I wrote a review about it in my library e-blast. And one of my library patrons, who's Barbara Werber, who happens to be here and is listening, said, oh, Karen Dukess, she grew up with my daughter and went to school in Mamaroneck High School. And I said, Facebook. And I sent a note to Karen via Facebook, and here she is to take us to the most beautiful place in the world. Her book is about the Cape Cod shoreland, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story, coming of age story about somebody who lived in New York and in Cape Cod. And because we've been all tied down these past number of months, Karen's going to take us to paradise. Karen, go.
Okay, well, that's a pretty tall order, but thank you so much, Lori. And I have to say, getting a note out of the blue from a reader and a librarian was really wonderful. I mean, that's the best thing about writing a book is, hearing from readers who were touched or moved by it. And as there's a librarian in my book, it was particularly nice to get a compliment from a librarian. So I want to show you the cover of the paperback. Can you see that? I don't. Which is a little different than the hardcover. It's a little more summary. It just came out on Tuesday. And The Last Book Party is set in 1987 in the New York publishing world and in a literary community in Cape Cod in the town of Truro, which is all the way out at the end of Cape Cod, right before the very end, which is Provincetown. And it follows Eve Rosen. She's 25, and she's passed over for a job in publishing, and she flees off to her parents' house in Cape Cod, where she takes a job as an assistant to a New Yorker writer who lives in an old house in Truro with his wife, who's a poet. And it's really about her steps and her missteps over the course of one summer to try to find her voice, claim her voice as a writer. And she makes some serious missteps along the way, going about it the wrong way. And it's a very bookish book. There are lots of books mentioned in the book, more than 50. But it's meant to be a fun read. I think it's a quick read. Hopefully it's a moving read. It's kind of an empowering and inspiring read as this young woman kind of finds herself. And it drew on my brief experience working in publishing right after I graduated college. I was passed over for a promotion, but I did not run off to Cape Cod and work for a New Yorker writer. I went to work for a literary agent, and that agent represented a lot of great novelists like Joan Didion and writers, and John Fowles and Marge Piercy, but she also represented a lot of journalists. And I was sitting in a little windowless room typing from a dictaphone, like my protagonist does in the book, and thinking, I don't want to be doing this. I want to be, going out and doing these adventures that these journalists are doing, that I was, doing the administrative work so they could get contracts to go see the world. So I went to journalism school. So my path and Eve's paths diverged. But the journey that Eve takes in the novel to claim her voice as a writer is very much like my own. It's just that what Eve did over the course of a summer, I took about 4.5 decades to do. Because I wanted to be a writer from a very young age. When I was in 3rd grade, I used to write, and I wrote many chapters of a book that was sort of just a fantasy, and it was fun, about a girl who lived on a ranch and she had horses. She didn't live in the suburbs like I did. I love to read. In fact, today I was reminiscing with a friend who grew up in Larchmont, a friend who has an incredible memory. I said to her, I have a real test for you. I said, do you remember the name of the children's librarian in the Larchmont Library when we were little? And she did, which I could not believe, because I remember the librarian incredibly well. It was Mrs. Misita. I did not remember her name. I don't know if anyone listening remembers her, but I remember like what a event it was to go to Larchmont Library Children's Room and get a book. And she was not your sort of cozy, friendly librarian. She was very nice, but very dignified. And it always felt very like a special thing to get a book. So I was very bookish and I wanted to write. But when I became a teenager and really more in college, writing became something that wasn't really joyful for me anymore. It was too caught up in intellectual angst, and competition. Who were the good writers? And I was at Brown University. There were a lot of good writers there. Rick Moody, who wrote The Ice Storm, was there, and Jeff Eugenides, who wrote Middlesex, was there. And it was very intimidating. And I felt like I'm from the suburbs and I'm kind of conventional, timid girl. I'm not writer material. And I didn't even really know what I wanted to say. And so I thought, I'm not really meant to be a writer. It's too hard and I'm too shy. So really for most of my career, I did writing type jobs, but I was kind of dancing around my desire to write. So I was a journalist, as I mentioned. I was a journalist in Florida. I was a journalist in Russia. I wrote book reviews and magazine articles, and I wrote speeches for many years at the UN. And these were all really wonderful jobs, but they weren't what I really wanted to be doing. And it wasn't until I was almost 50 and I joined a writing group and I started writing, taking myself more seriously as a writer and kind of unlearning things I had learned along the way, where I felt like writing is supposed to be easier. It should just flow. You should know what you want to say. You should come up with the story first and then write it. I didn't understand that you could write as an act of discovery, that you could figure it out as you went. And that if you feel a little queasy when you sit down to write, that is not a sign you're not meant to write. It might be a sign that you are, and that you have to just that everyone goes through that and you have to push through it. And, these are some of the things that Eve learns over the course of the summer in this book, but with a lot of drama and fun at the same time. So I joined this writing group and I started writing seriously, and that's when I started this novel and finished the novel. And I couldn't have done it if I hadn't had this group and this support. So the book, it has this truth to it of a writing journey that's mine, but the plot is completely fictional. And I had some, it was fun to write. The book is bookended by parties. There's the opening party when Eve is introduced to this writerly world in Cape Cod that she wants to be a part of, and she kind of insinuates herself into it. And then the end, it kind of climaxes with a book party, like the title. This New Yorker writer and his poet wife hold a party every year where the guests all dress as literary characters, and it becomes kind of a fun silly competition where people try to do obscure characters and they try to guess who the characters are. And it's at this party that Eve kind of discovers some things that she didn't know that aren't the way she thought, and these disclosures set her on a new path. So there are lots of books mentioned in the books. I'm writing about writers and readers, so there's like more than 50 books in the book, which surprised me when I finished it, that I didn't realize I had put that many books in, but they're just kind of like in me, and they were a way to reflect who these characters are. You know, books are such a signifier of who we are, and the books we love say something about who we are, and then they say something about who we want to be perceived to be. Books are also a tool of seduction, you know, how we get close to people. We share the books that we love. So there are lots of books in this book. And in this edition, the paperback, there's an essay in the back of the book about all the books in the book and why some of them are there. So that's something I did after, you know, the book was published, and a lot of readers started reading books in the book, which was really nice. There's a list of them on my website. There's a reading group guide as well, and it has a list of all the books. So a lot of people have kind of gone through them and read. So some of them are very well-known books, and some are a little more obscure. They're very eclectic. As my bio said, I'm a very eclectic reader. I will read all different things. So should I stop there and open up to questions, Lori? I can blabber on, but you know, I'm happy to talk about anything about the book or the writing process. Anything at all.
Yes, I think it would be a good idea. Everybody can ask away. I have a question, but I'll save it for letting other people look at it. There is